Okay, so good morning or good lunchtime, everyone. Thank you for joining the 21st Delivery Club call, virtual meeting number 6. Many of you will know what the club is about, but you're going to have the recording of today to look back on. We have got a vision, a purpose, strategy, and the events that we're running at the moment in this COVID world very much fit with that. And you can see around strategy, theme-based, facilitated conversations. And we've got a fantastic presenter today. The club, as you know, one of the initiatives is the Delivery Manifesto book. Again, you can have a look at this. And out of the Delivery Manifesto book, we've been interviewing people, which has been very successful, and we've done Louisa, Dave, and David so far. You can click through in those, and that's the kind of commitments and underlying principles that we're slowly working our way through. And we've got a few more interviews, I believe, in the way. And in fact, Jonathan, there's a couple of new members that are coming on board who are actually keen to be interviewed as well, which is super.
Who's that, Donnie?
Sorry, one of the new members is a woman called Frances Nichols, who is working D&G on growth programs. I'll tell you about that. So today's presentation is by Ruth, which we'll say a little bit about in a moment, and Dave Cock and Sarah Coleman. And Sarah's joining us today, which is super. Are going to talk about the skills necessary to deliver global projects of tomorrow. March was still to finalise, and Lindsay, I may come back to about, we may in February have Lindsay presenting about the new PMO competency frameworks and the future of PMOs. And we're bang up to date now in that we've actually got the presentations on LinkedIn and YouTube. So what we're going to record today will go up on YouTube so that we can all become YouTube sensations. But primarily, Jonathan's doing a great job of chopping the videos up into bite-sized pieces. And that is very broadly what Dave and Sarah will be picking up on, which we'll hear more about. And today, as I said, we've got the wonderful Ruth, who's going to be talking about MSP and the APM body of knowledge. So with no further ado, I will stop sharing. And Ruth, over to you. You should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Let's look. Spinning wheel of death on my very slow Mac. There we go. Are we good there? Okay, so I'll crack on. I think I don't know most of you. I know some of you, Sarah and Jonathan. I have done and do quite a few things, as that list suggests there, all around planned organisational change. I've worked in org change most of my career, in proper jobs, as my mum calls them, and as a consultant in a Big Four, back into practice again, and I'm consulting at the moment, and I also teach at Oxford Business School. My doctorate is around org change. So I've got particular interests, however, in risk management. So some of you might have heard of actually my work in risk management, and particularly the human aspects of risk management, where I've done quite a bit. But just a little bit of a shout out here for my next new book, which is something completely different, working with Eleanor Winton, who I worked with in KPMG, and she's a futures person, an innovation specialist, and we've done a piece that's quite fun around disruption game plan. However, what I seem to have become a bit useful as, or known for, and this is, I'm not sure it's even a great accolade, is in writing or editing guidance manual. So I was asked by APM to be lead editor of the Body of Knowledge 7th edition. That was published in May 2019. On the back of that, Axilos asked me to be the lead editor of the 5th edition of MSP, published just last year. And I'm actually working on another one now, and then I give up. I truly give up. So I just want to say a few words as well about the work on the Code of Practice for Project Management in the Built Environment for the Chartered Institute of Building. And a really quick reflection on those publications, you know, the 7th, the 5th and the 6th editions respectively. Like, you know, who knew there was anything more to say on this subject? So put aside the business models, you know, the rationale for updating these things from a business model point of view for Axilos or APM or for any of the professional bodies. You know, I have been quite challenging saying, well, you know, is there any new stuff to say, and how do these methods and guidance help or hinder delivery, which I thought what might be a nice thing for us to chat about. So let me do a quick rattle through a few things that hopefully you'll find useful. First of all, the APM body of knowledge. Obviously, the APM BoK focus, it's not a method. It's not intended to be a method. APM call it a foundational knowledge resource. For me, the body of knowledge is about really calling out the breadth of the profession rather than any depth on anything. So it's, you know, it's a thin layer of jam, if you like. Looking at project-based working across projects, programs and portfolios. I just wanted to say a few things about changes in the 7th edition that I think are sort of trends, and I'd be interested to have a conversation with you about whether any of this, you know, helps or not. But certainly in the 7th edition of the Body of Knowledge, we focused on the strategic context much more than I think APM had ever done before. And that certainly seems to be a real, you know, everywhere I would go now, it's absolutely accepted that project-based working needs to be benefits focused, and it's about change, you know, before it's about schedules and contracts. And there was a day when everybody would have been obsessed with schedules and contracts or the like, you know, and that we've sort of elevated the positioning, but also, and I worked really closely with Darren Dalcher, as well as other authors, and indeed Sarah, who helped a lot on the people and behaviours topics on this. We wanted to somehow communicate that leaders have choices to make when they're thinking about how to organise to deliver major change. And we desperately wanted to try and sidestep the waterfall versus agile rhetoric. So we talked about you know, linear, iterative, and hybrid approaches in there, and I'm quite encouraged that certainly I read and I hear people and read a lot about people talking about hybrid approaches and realizing that this you know, almost it felt for a while for me like a bit of a war. You know, it's like, oh, waterfall's dead, long live agile. Like, give over, you know. I just can't buy that. So it's much more subtle than that. So we really tried to sort of play with that in the 7th edition, and you know, more topics than ever, 64 discrete topics across that sort of strategy piece. And we've got a whole chapter on setting up for success, a people and behaviours chapter, and then a planning and controlling deployment chapter, which gets into maybe some of the historical techniques. So just wanted to sort of whistle through that, really, for anybody who's not sure, and you might have questions and comments about how useful that is, which would be interesting. But moving on to MSP, obviously, unlike the APM body of knowledge, MSP is supposed to be a method. And it's really an interesting one because in saying that actually program management is a way of enabling organizational agility when you're pursuing major organizational change. The paradox of, well, you want to build it, you want the method to enable agility, but also have some strong governance and decision making around that. There's lots that's very similar in 5th edition to 4th edition. I'll say some more about that, but particularly the MSP, has got principles and it's got themes and processes. In the 4th edition, if you're familiar with that, there were principles, governance, themes, and they had this thing called the Transformational Flow. It was when we were in a stage of trying to differentiate the language of programs from the language of projects. And I think, one of the things that I've realized is people have sort of stopped trying to do that and put clear blue water between what's a project, what's a program. And it's all far more nuanced now. So principles, themes and processes, in an iterative life cycle, incremental progression. And what we try, I've got my next slide looks at some of the focus on some of the changes, but if you are familiar with MSP, what you'll find is in this 5th edition, we've got far fewer compulsory documents or prescribed practices, and more ability to tailor, more of an organising framework. And let me just sort of focus on some of the changes. I guess, I'm just trying to think when I first started, thinking about program management, and probably the late 90s, I did a chapter in the Gower Handbook, actually, of project management with Michel Thierry. And even then we were talking about programs being the bridge between strategy and project delivery, and those sort of languages of that sort of language, spanning the gap between strategy and projects. But I think that one of the things I was very conscious of in coming to MSP as lead editor was that, having said all that, MSP still felt like it had been approached from a project mindset. So it was, almost like, some of the techniques and everything, they felt like big projects, and maybe less of an organisational view, and particularly around some of the ongoing justification for programmes. So I was conscious of that coming into this, and just want to sort of highlight a few areas and changes. So, the first one, we've got this thing called the Justification Theme. I think there was a business case thing before, but it didn't really get into a more economic view of the initial and ongoing justification of the programme, and how the investing organisations were going to make decisions around that. So there's much more of an emphasis on that in fifth edition. There's also much more of a focus on decisions, not just on reporting. Let's report some stuff. No, what are we going to do? So decisions are not just looking back, but also looking forward. So, much more, hints of how programs can be far more anticipatory of change and, disruption, emergent risk, etc. In decision making. And that really ties into this step in the process that comes at the end of a tranche, and before you go either close the program and go into the next one, to say, right, okay, what's new here? Not only what have we learned in this tranche, but also what's out there in the environment that we need to take account of. All this was sort of implied, but not really nailed, I thought, in the previous versions. People say, where's the benefits principle? Where's the benefits theme? Or why does it say benefits in the processes? So we decided to say, well, look, benefits are vital, I would say fundamental for programs. So the benefits focus is a principle, and it applies in every theme and every process, as is the case with risk, actually, and that mustn't be my next one. we changed the language from 4th to 5th edition to stop talking about a blueprint and to start to talk about a target operating model. I don't know about you, but that's the language that my clients use, that I use. You know, that, you know, blueprint always felt to be a bit of a, I don't know, it was an unhelpful title, because we think of blueprints as being the answer, if you like, in an engineering term, and it was difficult to I think get people to understand that the blueprint then wasn't fixed. It was a hypothesis of what the organisation might look like when you finished. So we've used the language of target operating model and done much more about design, you know, and so some of the language that you've been used to, you know, from vision statements and stuff, but really trying to make sure that, you know, the vision, you know, the benefits, the target operating model are coherent and connected, and that there's take account of risk. And also, again, you know, we don't have a risk theme, or but we have this principle that we've called deal with ambiguity. A bit of argument about that, really, but the view that you know, risk in programs tends to be about things we don't know. It is about ambiguity. It's not about fundamental, you know, aleatoric uncertainty. It's about ambiguity. And so that's what we call the process there. We also have really sort of beefed up both the knowledge theme and the assurance theme. And so the assurance theme is based around 3 lines of defence now, and tied much more through into corporate governance and through into programmes. And also we've really tried to get away from, as we did with APM Body of Knowledge 7, that sort of transactional view of learning and lessons learned, which is a title I'm not very fond of, and really to think about knowledge and community practice, etc., in a much more mature way, which obviously you guys will be happy with, hopefully. The final thing I just want to say on here is we kept the word tranche. We started off with a view to say we ought to change that, people don't like it, and then couldn't think of a better word because chunk and slice and stuff didn't really work. So we've stuck with tranche, but there is a phrase, this is an Axelos phrase that they'd used before MSP, the idea of multimodal delivery. And what they mean by multimodal is that programs, of course, that work within a program, it could be projects, or we could say other work, because it could be you know, process improvement that's not organized as a project, for example, but that, you know, making it really clear how projects using maybe an agile way of working, you know, can coexist very happily alongside projects that are using a linear life cycle, or, you know, other techniques within the same program structure. So Axelos call that multimodal delivery. Okay, conscious of time, just another step. So if APM's sort of well, this is the knowledge, these are the knowledge areas, if you like, and MSPs intended to be a method. It's quite interesting, actually, doing this piece for Chartered Institute of Building, where they really want to take an asset, a product life cycle, or an asset life cycle view to their guidance, and this is the life cycle that we're using in that. This is all hot off the press. I'm in the middle of writing at the moment, but very interesting. I don't know how many of you work on you know, physical assets and built environment, but you know, there's just the strategic drivers in that context are, you know, there's a lot of change, you know, obviously following on from, you know, the Pharma Review a few years ago now, the Hackett Report post-Grenfell, and loads of stuff coming out of government, you know, whether it's you the construction playbook, which was out just about a month ago. Lots of things changing, which is really saying, how we're doing projects in the built environment is not working, and a sense that there's been a historic, I think Dame Judy Hackett called it a race to the bottom in terms of quality, in terms of profitability in the sector, and also a real sense that there's far too much design push and user pull. Therefore, buildings that are not ever used as designed, they just don't work for the end user, the occupant. So this has been quite interesting for me to sort of do something that then is taking very much an asset view, but talking about project management in that context. And CIOB would use projects where we might call them programs, but certainly major projects. So just really my final slide, and do methods and guidance help or hinder delivery? I mean, for me, maybe I would say this because I've been involved in some of this stuff, but there's lots of other stuff that I'm reading, I guess, which says to me our profession is feeling a bit more grown up on paper. And more of a reflection of the strategic context, with an acknowledgement that we've got choices to make as leaders as we just start to shape and frame and deliver sort of major change. And obviously, much more of a conversation about an ability to flex and adapt, to focus on value, to take risk, not avoid risk, and for decision making to be risk informed. And so I just wanted to end really and kick us into a discussion with, well, so what really? Does any of this stuff help in practice? How are you feeling about that as practitioners? What do you use? What do you not use? What's useful? What's not? And what's missing? Was where I thought I would end the talk. Is that about right on time, Donnie?
Well, I think you're about 43 seconds under, Ruth. So
sorry, short-changed. I was sorry. Right.
Great.
Well, by the time I've stopped sharing, yeah, and then yeah.
That's fantastic. That certainly raised a few things. Does
yeah, Lindsay's asked a question, hasn't there? Is there any mention of PMO in the new version of MSP? Yeah, there is. So MSP calls it the program office, but actually what the key role with MSP, because it's got like roles and responsibilities everywhere, tables of, mapping of what this role does in this process and all the rest of it. And the roles that we map are SRO, program manager, business change manager, and program office lead. So the program office lead sort of gets an official, major role, if you like, alongside those others.
Yeah, super. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Right, who's got the first? I've got a few questions, but I would let somebody kick off. Subhash, go for it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ruth. Interesting. I think I would dare to suggest that I think we have gone through cycles, as you mentioned, 7th, 5th, 6th editions, and is there anything more to say? And I think at the core, there isn't at the core. However, our application and use of different methodologies is influencing the core. My real concern about the not constant change, but changes and updates, which I appreciate need to happen, is that there is still a very poor compliance to this. And dare I say it as well, there is still a competency issue. And I just feel personally that the level of effort needs, in my view at least, needs to be on those issues, because we can keep producing frameworks, guidelines, best practices, etc. But if people aren't, if it's not ingrained in how we deliver projects, as is evident, I think, as we look around, I'm not sure how much more we're going to help with that.
I mean, I personally have lots of sympathy with that, because you know, it's almost, it just feels like latest fad, some of the stuff, you know, where just some of those core skills aren't there in some places. A huge amount of sympathy.
Okay.
And any other thoughts on that?
Can I, it's an interesting conversation about competencies and the kind of knowledge skill gap. So I think you're right. We have this huge array, an ever-growing, increasing array of guidance, of blogs, of research papers, of books. And we do add to it. And I think there's nothing wrong with adding what is in the current ideas, currently sustainability, diversity, investment, post-implementation investment reviews, which is my particular interest at the moment with what I'm doing. So yes, we keep producing this, but for me, it's the knowledge skill gap. And I'm wondering whether the real value of this might be on for people who are starting out in their particular roles, new promotions, new entrants to project program management, to help them get started, give them a framework, give them something, a structure of some kind to help them move through maturity. But it is at the final response, and I think the CHPP and all of the accreditations that actually try to assess the experience, it's only when you've gone through the experience then you can start to say, yes, I get it, but actually I don't necessarily need to do it in this way.
That's right.
I
mean, you know, for me, completely with you, Sarah, and the challenge with a lot of these, obviously APM's got a different view and it's got a route to chartered now, which is useful for lots of us, but certainly I don't want to be criticising Axilos because they paid me money to do that job, but they, you know, it can feel like, oh, well, here's a new thing that obviously their business model is selling exams. All of, you know, the business model is all about supporting an individual's accreditation with something, whereas something like MSP, you can't implement as an individual, you know, like the organisation needs. So yeah, it can feel a bit like a racket, can't it? And that we're not actually building expertise. We're just getting people to tell us that they've got some knowledge of another book.
But I think
Dave, sorry, Dave's got his hand up.
Oh.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. So I just really wanted to make a quick comment. I've been through the MSP practitioner training, etc., and it's something that we as a company, I work for an organisation called Kinetic, so it's a global defence company, and we do try at least to manage our programs along the lines of MSP, but we continually fail. My observation of that is that actually MSP, as it was written before, was almost quite academic in a way, and it was quite difficult for organisations to really align themselves with MSP. And I think part of that was around the way that some of the things were described. So where you've talked about earlier the changes to some of the terminology and the sort of vernacular that's used, I think that's really going to help actually. So I'm really looking forward to having another go through that. And again, most organisations will take something like that and then make it their own by chopping and changing it to make it fully aligned. But at the moment, the previous version I think was quite tough to implement that. But I think what you're driving towards with this version is something that is actually probably more usable and understandable and doesn't feel quite so, dare I say, academic. So really welcome. Welcome the changes.
Yeah, I hope so. Let me know if it's edging in the right direction. Yeah, thank you. Warren's asked a question. Yeah, may I ask what the views are on the application of these principles and managing the interface risk across commercial boundaries, particularly design and constructing interfaces where I believe many risks are baked into projects? Yeah, Go on, Jonathan.
That's a really interesting question. One of my little kind of intellectual thought pieces is how we see particularly projects, how we see a project as a single thing, which is generally through the eyes of the client or the people paying for the project. And I kind of think projects are much more complex than that, because depending on who you are and where you are in the life cycle, in the stage of and in the supply chain, the project is a different thing to everybody. So I think Warren, your comment is very valid there, because I think just looking at this, seeing a project as a nice long snake is actually doesn't really help, because it doesn't capture a lot of the nuances and a lot of the problems you're alluding to, things that aren't really referenced, dare I say it, in the body of knowledge, and which influence and affect projects in different ways. Interface is a good example, and the relationship between design and construction. There's almost a sense that this is a seamless activity, rather than the project is a series of discrete and actually unconnected activities that we kind of mash together into this stream, and we forget the fact that actually it's a collection of discrete and unconnected activities that we've chosen to mash together as a single sort of stream. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but I do recognise the problem.
People ever get a single approach like the highway code is driving. I'm old, not in my lifetime, but I think one of the reasons why we won't is that there are too many vested interests in keeping it different.
Yeah, commercial.
Too many commercial. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, everyone, and there's new stuff coming out, like just loads of new things all the time. Yeah. Just to Warren's point, it's been fascinating for me working with the Chartered Institute of Building thing, in saying, well, because if you think about major infrastructure type projects, what the project is very different depending on whether you're the client, whether you're a prime contractor, whether you're another subcontractor, whether you're the architect, whether all of those views are very different. And we've spent a lot of time in thrashing out just how to, from whose perspective am I writing this guide? Because it's so easy to go, oh, we're in early life cycle, so I'm writing from the client perspective. Now we're in design, and now I'm writing from the perspective of the consultants, of the architecture, and so I've been saying, look, we need to make this clear, and that the decision making at state and the relationships between those parties, and it's not easy to do. And I'm doing some work with Kia at the moment, so if you're a Kia group and you're the prime contractor on something significant, what the project is from your point of view and what the risks are very different from if you're HS2 or a local authority or whoever it is they're working for. And I wonder, I'm not going to fix it in this book for sure, but but I've come face to face with it in trying to sort out actually what to write.
Well, I'm sorry if anybody's come on this call then, because I'm sure I pitched this as how Ruth was going to tell us how she'd fix the world. So apologies if I've disappointed anyone.
If you want me to get into telling you, I'll pretend, but I'd just be making it up.
Is it? I mean,
can I just put a follow-up into that, Donnie, just from
go for
what Ruth was saying. Sorry to interrupt. I also do quite a lot of work with Kia and other tier 1 contractors actually in this sort of space, but looking at it from professional services delivery and professional services risk management, and a lot of that is more about the consistency of doing what you're being engaged to do and how you're actually managing that from an internal controls perspective.
Yeah.
I've also just done a master's in project management, so I've read a lot of the background on all of this, and what I've struggled with throughout doing that is actually interfacing the concepts that we're talking about here and its application when you're looking at it from, you know, I mean, the project manager to a tier 1 contractor is actually somebody within the contracting group. It's not somebody sitting with the client. So you've immediately got that control interface question. But behind all of that, I've been looking at things like scheduling risk and saying, well, why is it that I've never been able to find an insurance loss adjuster or a lawyer who's trying to help settle a dispute in a contract where both parties can actually agree where the project was at the moment of the event or the dispute, and even the origins of causation. Yeah. And my conclusion around a lot of that is simply that the outlook of the parties is not aligned, and actually some of the commercial expectations in those contracts is baking additional risk into those contracts and into those projects, simply because the monitoring and performance expectations and the intervention and the interaction between those parties is actually sort of expected to be confrontational as opposed to collaborative. And it's that entire piece that I think I'm still struggling to see how these books of knowledge and the other methodologies that are being set around some of that, how that is actually helping this point, because it seems to me, if you're the employer and you're representing the employer, you've got a very specific way that you can be dealing with that. But it doesn't actually sort of build a collaborative environment within which to best represent the benefits that are expected out of that project.
Yeah. Well, and I completely understand everything you're saying. And, you know, my world actually hasn't been projects in major infrastructure in terms of like my practitioner experience is not leading those projects, but being in and around those and doing a lot of work with government people through my work at Oxford Said, that there's just, you're absolutely right, it's a misalignment of perspectives and objectives. And, you know, as you know, if your objectives aren't aligned, then your risk analysis never will be, because the risks to what are the objectives at risk? If you've got a different perception of what those are, you're going to be all over the place. So, yeah, all I can do is concur with your analysis. I think it's spot on. And it's what the Pharma Review, if you've ever read that, is really getting, you know, to that. I mean, it's called Modernise or Die. And, you know, there's a huge amount in there about, unless we can provide the incentives to be collaborative in supply chains in the built environment, because, you know, for the contractors, you know, their margins are pitiful. And so it drives all sorts of silly behaviors because they're just trying to protect a 3% margin. You know, so if the profitability is not there in the supply chain, then it doesn't incentivize the right behaviours. So,
yeah, and extending that slightly, it ultimately means, particularly in the modern environment of tier 1s being managers as opposed to builders in most instances, the actual collateral damage ultimately across that is the lower end of the supply chain, and your tier 2 plus is essentially becoming the poor man at the table, who is actually seen as the piece that is the expendable piece, and it's long term. It can't be the way we want to be going, because there's no point being able to build a hospital today at a certain price and have some idea of the quality, albeit the Cole report, etc., is very much challenging that around the use of clerk of works and all the rest of it. But if you're sub a price level that's able to keep everybody whole, then in the long term we all lose.
Yeah, agree.
So, it's interesting. There's I guess the application is, Ruth, so listening in and what you said has been fantastic, because I've got a piece of work I'm doing in a group that Warren's a member of as well, through a European organization. I can't say too much about it, but with a European country, and it's putting in place a program management function, a program function within it. They're much smaller than the UK, but it's how do you take some of the lessons and learnings from the UK and apply it into a country that doesn't have much of the infrastructure that we have, or in any sense of the word. And this, I was just sitting reflecting on that and thinking, oh my God, if we tried to even introduce this there, that would not go down well, simply because there's such a low level of maturity in the government and their view of it. But I'm now going to contradict myself with two different things, because I was sitting looking at this and going, thank God that we do update these things and we do have new versions of them that people can learn from. And okay, I take the point, it's individual competence. But then I think, you know, 15, 20 years ago, we thought the world was complex because there was project stuff and there was program, there's portfolio and this, and there would be, I don't know, tell me if I'm having recollections wrong, there'd be like one book would come out on some new topic or other, and there'd be a big debate around the APM or somewhere about it. There's been 5,000 layers since then. So almost trying to pick what program management is and where MSP fits, you couldn't almost now even draw the landscape as to where it fits anymore. Whereas 15, 20 years ago, it was difficult to get it right. Now it's almost a fool's errand. And I'm not saying that this is a fool's errand. So it's like, in one part of me, it's like wonderful it's been done. And the other bit is, oh my God, the pain people must have to try and apply it to frames where they don't even use the word project, program, portfolio, but effectively that is their world is doing what, and it's just, I've got no particular question. I just think, my God, the different worlds, unless you've got a very traditional organization that's still got a very traditional view and can use this, the application of it could become very difficult. And Jonathan, you're on mute, by the way, Jonathan.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I've always, in the books that I've commissioned and edited and read in the past, I've always tended to draw quite broad brush and sometimes often sort of heuristics from them. So Ruth, you talked about Michel Thierry, and when I read his book on program management, that kind of made sense to me, because I could see programs are about delivering capability and projects are about delivering assets. And of course, that's a huge simplification, but actually the minute I can understand in those, and when I think about Dave, about your work and the way that the defense industry has moved from delivering physical assets to delivering capability, I can understand. You know, I would have no concept of what a kinetic program looks like, and it would be beyond my understanding. But I can understand it because at the same time, it's a weird sort of, I can understand this concept of capability versus asset. And I think for me anyway, the bodies of knowledge and MSP and things, they provide a sort of xylophone of sounds underneath the basic idea that I can kind of hit and think, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, and it just helps me get my own head around what is capability, what is delivering an asset. So they are extremely valuable as a sort of, as a way of looking at, you know, looking at what it is and then making my own judgment as to, is it that? Because I think fundamentally, the one thing that we have to do, the one thing that's fundamental to all of this is understanding. And the difficulty, I think, with both projects and programs, and certainly in large and complex programs, is people not really understanding what it is they're doing. They are kind of, you used the word blueprint earlier, Ruth, they're kind of following the blueprint, but they look at the blueprint and they really don't see a building. They just see a series of lines connecting, and that's what they're trying to join together. So I you know, that's how I see kind of bodies of knowledge as the sort of sounds in the orchestra, and for us to kind of work out whether that makes sense or not.
And we need the whole thing about sort of choices and having senior leaders who are savvy enough about, you know, how to just guide the team or who to recruit, etc. was really on my mind. So I'd spent this 3 years at Associated British Ports as the director of their change portfolio. And so, there were lots of infrastructure type works going on alongside a massive org change vision, I guess. Wholly optimistic vision. But what I realized there, and ABP is not huge, it's about 2,000 employees. I was in the senior leadership team, but what I realized very quickly was we were setting off on some big changes with very little capability in the organization, top to bottom, of how to go about it. And then it's like, oh, well, we'll need a program director for this. So then you go out to the market and what are we looking for? And you get one person who's got really strong ideas about what to do. And then we'll recruit somebody else who's going to manage a PMO. And they've got, and before my eyes, there's all this clash of ideas and stuff and, like documents being produced and it was all rubbish. It wasn't taking us forward. Well, it wasn't rubbish in itself, but it was conflicting. And no sort of guiding view of what to do, which you could argue was my job, but it was really hard to do. To just try and get any sense into any of this. So yeah, some of those big ideas, I think we need senior leaders to get more. And then some more mature choices can be made then lower down about what, just what method you're going to use or.
I'd support that, Ruth. Sorry, it's John Southgate. Apologies, I can't go on video. But I think it is interesting because I think we've got this, holistic overview in terms of a method, and we've got good practice. Inevitably as well, I think, and it almost ties in with the point Warren made about risk, is when we actually pull together our project teams, that leadership is so important because we do end up still in our industry with functionary type of people within the program. So we will have QSs who are very contract facing QSs. You will have designers who are really interested in the quality and the compliance and even their PI in terms of when it comes to doing the design. The coordination of that together and the understanding of that interfaces between the parties is something that I've always found has been the hardest thing when managing programs or major projects, to get everybody aligned to the same objective and understand, particularly when you then take that sort of horizontal silos and then you build the verticals as you go through the supply chain, and trying to get people to understand just on the risk management how they're managing risk by each discipline and then through the layers is a massive task. I mean, we started with the philosophy that as the employer we would understand the risks all the way through the supply chain, and it was our responsibility to assist in the mitigation of all of those risks, particularly when we were getting to tier 1 and tier 2. And we found out, the common practice in the industry was that classic of transfer and ignore. Yeah, I've transferred the risk. Have you transferred that risk? Yes. What do you reckon that risk is worth? Well, it could cost us up to $500,000 or $1.5 million. Yeah. What's the cap on liability in that contract? Oh, about 400,000, right? So you haven't transferred the risk. You're still holding it yourself. You need to be managing with your supply chain and with your multidisciplines. And I think that is one of the catalysts to get to a collaborative rather than a conflictive approach to managing a good outcome. But it really does come down to the thing that I've always found that one single entity that unites everyone down and across is the pound notes. When you put a commercial financial aspect to it, you get focus. Ditto with safety. Everything else, no. It really difficult. So I think we've got to find ways of using those levers and catalysts to create that more collaborative approach in some of these aspects.
Yeah, I call that fire and forget contracting, Jonathan.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
And I think the reality, coming back to what you just said there, I think the reality is if you come from a commercial legal background, then you're even as a leader, you are focused on commercial legal in the way that you both articulate expectations and also how you set your control environment. If you come from an environment where you are dealing with critical controls and you understand that interaction of those critical controls, then you may actually not be quite so focused and able to deal with that from a commercial contractual perspective, but very good at dealing with that critical control environment. The key is to actually be able to do both, because they're both just as important. And I think when projects are set up, they're very often set up only with that legal environment in mind, or only with that overall connectivity of controls in mind. And I think that's probably where, as a collective, we all fall over somewhere down the line.
I'm not sure if this is linked or not, but it's kind of going back to the document itself, Ruth, but it picks up in John's points and Warren's point. Is we're back to if the client who's commissioning, if they truly understood what a program was and what was required from them, these different perspectives and so on. The last version of MSP, I know there were these survival guides produced, and I think there was an executive level somewhere. I did go over my bookcase a moment ago, but I'm damned if I can find it. I thought there was a kind of, not quite an idiot's guide if you were a business leader. Yeah,
that's right. They TSO are commissioning those now. I've turned down the honour of writing those for 10% royalty. There's there was I think they were called survival guides, weren't they? So there was one for the SRO, one for the program manager, one for the BCM. And it's interesting. I mean, Jonathan, close your ears. But in this day and age, I think that's really useful content. But you don't want it in an 80 quid book. Which SRO is going to think, actually, probably in their quiet moments in the shower, realize that they're not really, like they've got some stuff to learn, but they aren't going to go and buy an 80 quid book from TSO to tell them how to do it. So I think we need to be more creative about how we sort of, get at. And I mean, I'm really privileged that I get to work as an action learning set facilitator with government SROs who are on Major Projects Leadership Academy at Oxford, and some brilliant conversations with those people who are, have got massive portfolios of really big change, and are going, I don't know how to do that. How do I sort out, to Warren's point, how do I incentivize the right behaviours across my supply chain for risk taking, or how might I go about structuring that? So I think you're right, Don. I think there's a real need, but I'm just not sure that writing it in books is the right thing.
It's a good, we could get another topic there a bit later. How do you get people to accept knowledge and so on? Go on, Jonathan. I know you've got a bit of knowledge around this.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Ruth. Although I think I'd qualify what you say. I think books are a great medium for people who read books, but only, I don't know what percentage, but only 5% of business managers actually read books.
Or would learn from books.
Or would learn from books. Yeah. And I must have told you this story. I've told everybody this story, but I remember when I was a publisher, and the same thing, exactly the same thing happened to me twice with different organizations. One was QA, and I can't remember who the other was. And I was at two different conferences, and somebody from QA and somebody from another organization came up to me and said, have you got anything for project sponsors? And I said, yeah, we've got David West's great paperback on project sponsorship. Really, really good. And the response was exactly the same. Was they looked at it and they kind of leafed through it, and then they said, yeah, almost word for word, we can't get them to read anything that's longer than 20 pages. And it was weird. They were sort of looking for a book on project sponsorship that was less than 20 pages. It was an oxymoron. So I do think books are valuable for those who enjoy reading and want to read books. But I think that's only a very small, and for that reason, I think, we talk about, I3P talks about the integrator, and Richard Farrow talked about the relationship manager. We need people like knowledge brokers, people like you and me, and probably many of the people in this conversation who do actually read books and who can communicate the knowledge of those books through kind of some sort of social media. And I'm not talking about Facebook, but through talking to people and that kind of thing, and sharing knowledge in that way, really.
It's interesting. I think of some of the things I've done, and it's use the term SRO, but you could say business leader who kind of needs to know about all this project program portfolio stuff. Well, it could be either. And one of them was around dinners for the board in a bank, which was, I have to say that was rather nice. I wish I was doing one of those every month. And the other one was when it was actually DEFRA, we did SRO training. This is donkeys years ago, and we structured it all. But how to get the actual SROs into something with to bring big wigs or names in, so they would sit and listen to them. And I'm sure Ruth and others, you know, the kind of fireside chats, Sarah and Ruth, you must have that thing. That's another way. So if somebody's heard of, I don't know, whatever, it may be Sir John Armitt. Oh, he's got a Sir in front, and John Armitt bit. It kind of rings a bell. I will. So now lately there's an awful lot of other ways, and who knows, maybe one of Elon Musk's chips in the future will solve the problem. You can just plug it in and it'll be like, oh gosh, right, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, so Jonathan's got his hand up, and Sarah. I don't know who was first. But should we do Sarah? Yeah, you go, Sarah, and then Jonathan next.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, Jonathan Southgate. Yeah, next.
I do think that when we're talking about senior managers who are very time poor, there's no doubt about it, but when they come in for a question, they usually have a very specific, very focused issue that they've got that they need to resolve. And I think that I get your point absolutely about sitting down reading a book. They just don't have the time, but they don't know where. They want very quick signposting to information that will absolutely focus on their particular issue at the time. And most of it is, certainly when I did some work with Rolls-Royce around sponsorship, for example, they facilitated it by taking all of their vice presidents right from around the world and putting them into a single group at a particular time and had the conversation. And doing much as we are now, which is first of all doing a little bit of a presentation around project sponsorship, but then talking generally about their own experiences and challenges and surprises and successes with it too. And I'm wondering whether a lot of this is just kind of really focusing in on the particular issue. There is a lot of information out there that you can draw on, but it's knowing where to go. And often people in those particular circumstances, especially since they are very senior and time poor, they go to people they trust to talk to, who they know, or that they've got a network with, or they've got a contact, and they'll start to talk about it. And I have this a lot when people come to me and say, do you know about, can you give me some advice? Can you point me in the direction of? Very pleased to do it, but they have, and I could actually say, here's reams and reams of information, and I can point you in all these kinds of directions, but I know that they've got to be very focused about what they want and how they want it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you just, I mean, for that, people do, you know, we all rely on our networks, don't we? That's a natural human thing to do, and to go to somebody who you think might know and you trust. And I think as it all gets, I don't mean the world gets more complex, but just this, you know, project-based guidance gets more complex. It's really hard then just to sort of point, you know, to know that you're being pointed in a decent direction, you know. And certainly in ABP we made loads of mistakes because, you know, like my boss who's the CEO, he'd say, yeah, but I talked to our the person who headed up, you know, program assurance at KPMG, who were our internal audit partners, you know, and I'd come from there, and I asked him, and he knew somebody who'd worked on something here, and he said they were great. So it's like, right, okay, you know, and it's understandable because James had no time. He wanted a recommendation, so he asked somebody who he thought would be, you know, reliable, and you don't always get what you need.
Ruth, can I suggest if we maybe bring it to just this to a close, and just thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. And I know that I've had messages while we've been on from the people who couldn't make it going, great, I've now heard that this is going to be recorded, so super. So just say thank you very much, Ruth.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you, Ruth.
It's been a pleasure. It's a chat with friends, isn't it? So it doesn't feel hard. Thank you for inviting me.